They are the Council's President, Abdul Jalil, and also its Prime Minister, Mahmoud Jibril. Those are the names that we hear all the time. Those are the faces of the new Libya. But of course, behind them, there is actually no government, because it's now been 2 months since the assassination of their top military commander, Abdel Fattah Younes. That rather threw what was then the Benghazi government into disarray. The government was disbanded. A new cabinet was to be formed, in theory, quite quickly. 2 months on, it has yet to happen. And this, of course, at a time precisely when Libya needs to reconstruct itself. It needs to begin with its reconstruction. It needs, after 42 years of dictatorial rule, there are no institutions, there's no civil society, there's no, not even a semblance of democracy, which you had in countries like Egypt and in Tunisia. Ben Ali would hold elections every 5 years, which he would win with extraordinary results. But he held them nonetheless. People are in the habit of voting. There are certain institutions that are in place. In Libya, it was run almost entirely like a cult, and nothing that resembles a modern democracy was allowed to exist. So this all needs reinventing. So that is one of the big things. Big divisions between tribes, all of those weapons out on the streets. This is one country that really needs a strong government, and for the time being, Claire, it doesn't have one at all.
So what are the main dividing issues? What's making it so hard for them to agree?
Well, this was a government that, even when they were between themselves in Benghazi, was already divided. I mentioned the assassination of the top military commander. An investigation is underway. We still don't know who was responsible, but there are suspicions that some involved in the Benghazi government may know more than they're saying they know. So all kinds of suspicions there. And that was the first inkling, really, that we started to get outside of Libya, that all was not well within even that transitional government, as it was at the time restricted to Benghazi, so the east of Libya with its own particular history. They have been divided all along. And what's happened since is that as the rebellion has progressed, as the civil war has advanced, different towns have been in the spotlight at different moments. We've heard a lot about the siege of Misrata for a while. Zintan had its own. And a number of different cities consider themselves to have suffered more or been more crucial in the ultimate liberation of Tripoli. Their leaders are now demanding a bigger piece of the political pie and blocking anything that seems not to give it to them. So you have these different regions, these different tribal leaders, these different rebellious leaders saying that now they want to be able to profit, in a sense, from what's happened. Now, there's also, inevitably, after 42 years, the kind of people that you attract to an interim government are either people who were close to the former regime, that is the case of Abdel Jalil, or there are people who've spent much of the last few decades abroad, and that is the case of Mahmoud Jibril. So both have their crosses to bear. Both have suspicions around them, around their credibility, because of those two different issues. And yet it is natural that they're, in a sense, the only people around, people who have a bit of baggage to carry. All that, of course, as I said, made worse by a civil war which has divided an already divided country along geographical and tribal lines. And it's very difficult to see how they can be anything other than hamstrung as they seek to make this government, which is only due to stay in place, Claire, for 8 months. But getting that in place seems to be a lot harder than anyone had anticipated.
And the fighting, of course, continues. They would have hoped that it would be over by now, and this adds to the political infighting, or that on top of the political infighting makes it very difficult.
Precisely. Their eye, in a sense, is off the ball. We've seen the difficulties for the last few weeks for the rebels of taking Sirte and Bani Walid in what seemed like the final stage. The number of times we've talked about the final siege beginning, we've heard that the rebels were on their way into these towns. And of course, that's because at the moment, the Transitional Council has other fish to fry. They're trying to get their act together. They're trying to get ordinary services up and running in the rest of Libya. They're trying to get a transitional government up and on its feet so that they can begin this transition to democracy. And of course, they're still having to fight these battles. And all this, of course, Claire, with the added danger of the oil that's there. This is a country in which many people have an interest. This is a country in which many of those who participated in the campaign against Colonel Gaddafi through NATO are keen to sort of get their companies in there to make the most of it. So there is so much potential there for corruption, for instability, and for a long period before anything like a safe and sure transition to democracy can actually be expected.
Thank you very much. Melissa Bell from our International Affairs Desk. Now, Scotland continues to investigate the 1988 Lockerbie bombing and had asked Libya's new leaders for help. Their response: the case is closed. The only person ever convicted in the attack is Abdel Basset Ali al-Megrahi, and he was released 2 years ago. Doctors said the former Libyan intelligence officer had only a few months to live. He's still alive, but Libya's interim government says he shouldn't face a new prosecution.
What I and all the world knows is that Mr. al-Megrahi was tried in the Lockerbie case and convicted. He appealed, and his conviction was upheld. Then the Scottish and later the British authorities decided to release him on compassionate grounds. For me as Minister of Justice, the case is finished, and it's not right to put someone on trial for the same thing twice. That is the basis of justice.
Now, the Foreign Office in London says it held talks with Libya's National Transitional Council late on Monday, and it's been promised continued cooperation on that matter. Moving on now to a powerful typhoon striking the Philippines. A baby boy was killed after falling into a swollen river, and several people are missing. The flooding and power cuts have forced many schools to shut, businesses and the US Embassy in Manila too. And scores of flights, both domestic and international, have been cancelled. At least 30 people, most of them school children, have been killed in a bus accident in Pakistan. Officials say the vehicle's brakes failed and it fell into a ravine. This on the Punjab province's main motorway. Dozens of passengers were injured. An investigation is now underway. Lawyers for Dominic Strauss-Kahn are asking a judge to dismiss a sexual assault civil suit against him, saying his job gave him immunity. The criminal case against the former IMF boss collapsed in August, and he recently described May's sexual encounter in New York as a moral fault. Now, to talk a little bit further about that civil case, I'm now joined by Christopher Mesnor, a lawyer here in Paris and in New York. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, what are the chances of Dominic Strauss-Kahn's lawyers succeeding with this bid to get the civil case thrown out?
The question of Mr. Strauss-Kahn's immunity was raised when he was arrested on May 14th. However, the question was never resolved by a court. So, in fact, the question remains completely open, and the lawyers for Mr. Strauss-Kahn, I think correctly, have decided that this is the moment to see whether an American court would agree with them that Mr. Strauss-Kahn does, in fact, benefit from diplomatic immunity.
And if the court recognizes that he does, in fact, benefit from this, then how quickly can we expect things to move forward?
Well, the court is certainly going to take a little time to review the issue because, as you can imagine, a civil court in the Bronx doesn't normally have to deal with this kind of difficult legal issue. Once the judge decides whether or not Mr. Strauss-Kahn has, in fact, the benefit of diplomatic immunity, if he decides in favor of Mr. Strauss-Kahn, then in fact the civil action will be dismissed as the criminal action was dismissed last month.
And if the civil action isn't dismissed, what then does Dominic Strauss-Kahn face?
Well, undoubtedly his lawyers will try other approaches to either stall or have the matter dismissed. Failing that, the civil trial will be organized. We will see the formation of a popular jury. The court will then fix a calendar, and the civil lawsuit will go forward as currently scheduled.
Now, Dominic Strauss-Kahn also faces a suit here in France, that of writer Tristan Banon. How do you see things going forward in that particular case?
In yesterday's filings, the lawyers for Mr. Strauss-Kahn asked specifically that any reference to any other lawsuit involving Mr. Strauss-Kahn be excluded from the hearings in New York. So at least formally, the Tristan Banon case will not have any direct impact on the civil action in New York, assuming such action goes forward. Okay,
Christopher Mesnor, thank you very much for that. Now, coming up after the break, our sports roundup, including a preview of tonight's Champions League matches and the latest from the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand.